Hello, and a very special On A Roll welcome to Neil from Fey Earth. Neil, thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
Thank you very much for having me, Ben.
Now, before I get into the professional questions that I've written down to ask you, I am personally very excited to chat to you because I am one of your backers on Kickstarter. So I have a vested interest in everyone else watching going to back. Because as you know, the model is it needs to get funded for me to get the things I want.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And I'm super excited because I backed at the top level, at the Fey Librarian level, which, I mean, for what I'm getting, incredibly reasonable. Beyond reasonable, I feel like I'm robbing you. So thank you for that. For anyone who might be flicking over, tabbing out to see what's on offer, you could join me at Fey Librarian. I am getting a digital copy of the core rulebook, a digital copy of the starter adventure, a hardback copy of the core rulebook, which is definitely what swayed me. I love just holding that book.
Yeah.
And then a GM screen. Like that.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So thank you very much. But I realized there might be some people watching who are going, Ben, you're very excited, and I don't know about what yet. So instead of me butchering it, Neil, if you wouldn't mind, for any viewers who might be unfamiliar, is there a Fey pun there? No. What is Fey Earth?
Okay, so Fey Earth is an indie TTRPG set in an alternate 19th century Earth where all the creatures from folklore and fairy tale are real, have always been real, and live alongside humanity. So it's this exciting world that is an alternate version of our own history, but it's a world rich with magic and with folklore. What makes the game quite distinct from other games actually is the way the Fey are portrayed in this game, okay? I have spent literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours over the last 7 years faithfully researching European folklore so that the Fey creatures in my game are portrayed as authentically as I can based on how they were described in the original stories of old that they appeared in. It meant that a lot of work, but has created a world that's really, really rich in its lore. And anybody who's played in it, not just my regular players for an actual stream, but I've run numerous one-shots with guest players. The one thing they all comment on is like how really rich and alive the lore of the setting is, even if they're only playing for 2 or 3 hours, because they're coming across creatures whose names they're familiar with, fairy, goblin, hobgoblin, kobold, but they're completely different to what you think of when you hear those names normally, because in Fey Earth, they are appearing as they did in the original stories. So in many cases, they are nothing at all like what you are used to when you hear those terms.
It's something I'm really excited about to play because as a boy who grew up in Ireland, much like many boys who grew up in Ireland, even just for 2 hours getting to, and we know how immersive tabletop can be and how genuinely I think our brains do trick us into feeling like we did do the things we did. Chatting to Fae, hanging out with fairies, living and breathing in a world that is just rich with folklore, which just reminds me of my childhood. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, well,
to get my hands on this.
We're lucky. We don't realize it as Irishmen how lucky we are, how rich the folklore of Ireland is, because that was the thing that really shocked me when I was doing my research. Because obviously, I'm extremely knowledgeable in Irish folklore, and to a lesser extent, know bits about Scottish, Welsh folklore, and the Nordic folklore. But then when I was researching other parts of Europe, realizing there's nothing. So much of the stories were lost. If you did not have individuals in your culture like the Brothers Grimm in Germany or Vito Italiano or in Italy, or people like that who actively were collecting these stories for prosperity, in many cases, the stories were just lost or almost completely lost. Compare that to Ireland, where we have some of the richest and most well-preserved folklore you will find, not just in Europe, but in the world. And that was something that really shocked me, which just was even more of a motivation to really bring this world to life so that these stories are kind of being preserved, they're being retold in something that's, an homage to the original story.
Yeah, yeah, it's something when it comes to folklore, and for viewers, the penny's probably dropped at why we're talking to Neil because it is an episode about folklore and mythology. Um, that I find the entry point quite interesting for people because you'll have movies, books, TV shows, things that have existed now, kind of in a modern era, heavily influenced by it. But if it was your first introduction, you'd be like, this story I'm reading is a little bit like that episode from Buffy.
Yeah.
And like, incorrect. No, the episode
Yeah.
from Buffy is like the story.
Exactly. Yeah.
So speaking of where it all began, a personal question for you. What was your first introduction to folklore or mythology?
Well, and this is going to sound very familiar to you, was in second class, hearing the stories about Children of Lear, Fionn McCool, Cuchulainn, the incredibly rich mythology that we have in Ireland, all those old stories. Now, I mean, as a child, I was an avid bookworm, so I'd read all of the ancient Greek myths as well as then people don't realize it, but growing up in Ireland in the 90s, our mythology was literally part of the primary school curriculum. This was like practically a history class, So, and you're hearing these incredibly rich stories. It's like, that was it, you're in. If I didn't love mythology from studying the classics beforehand, you'd be instantly hooked. You're reading about the Salmon of Knowledge, Oisin and Niamh and Tiernan Og and all these incredible stories, that you're straight away hooked, and then obviously as I got older, I'm then getting into classic high fantasy, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion. I have actually read The Silmarillion. Not many people can say that.
No,
all the other high fantasy, and then getting into finding other books on folklore. I'm also one of those weird tree-hugging neo-pagan types, so that was a whole other level of learning and reading as well. But yeah, so really it all just grew from there.
It's nice. It's you unlocked a memory in my childhood, which was long time viewers, and by long time I mean there's been long time people who've seen me and stuff know that I come with this sort of idiotic naivety to a lot of things I do. I forgot that I didn't realize the difference between history and folklore because of the way it was taught until I was much older, and I was just like, oh, sure, that happened in that did happen, didn't it? And it's because in Ireland they sort of moved from Cuchulainn, from Tiernan Og, from the stories of the Fianna into like stories of Brian Boru, who is real.
Yes, so exactly.
And you can understand where
but then not just that. When you hear stories about the Sidhe, the Fey, like in Ireland they'd just be called the little people, the Dini Mod, the good people, the fairies, or the Sidhe. Like what people don't realize is that up until about 50 years ago, people believed in the existence of the Sidhe and of fairies and Fey folk just as much as they believed in the existence of, rain and the weather. It was an integral part of Irish culture, especially in rural areas, in rural communities. And as you're saying, people would share these stories, and they would share them as a real event that occurred in history. And quite often in the stories, it would be, such and such, who was the great granddad of Tom, who lives down the road. Like that level of realism and of part of the community, So yeah, it's completely understandable that people who are growing up, and especially younger people, that they don't realize that, okay, this story is based on a historical event of someone we know definitely lived, and this is a story about somebody who claims to have been alive and may or may not have existed.
It makes sense if you spent any time in our country where 4 seasons can happen in a day, how easily it could be that you tell a story about a person who's traveling on the road for an entire year, because it probably feels that way walking from one place to another, where you hit snow and sun and rain. They've gone through the seasons. I did grow up thinking my uncle was a literal pirate, so easily convinced. Speaking of theme stories, folklore, and it being an oral tradition, do you have a favorite common story or common theme found across any folklore? It doesn't have to be Irish. I know we're close to Paddy's Day, but any folklore, because there is a bit of cyclical repetition to them.
I don't know, it's a tough one. I gotta say, I love the stories where a human manages to, by sheer dumb luck, catch a fey creature and then force them to give them a favor or a gift, which ends up going horribly wrong for them. You know,
Hmm.
you know, be careful what you wish for kind of story. I love those tales, of like the smug idiot human who thought they tricked the elf or the goblin, and they ask for this and then they get it, and then their life just turns to crap, and they're like, oh my god, I shouldn't have been an asshole. I should have just let them go.
Hmm.
And if I had, they probably would have blessed me with like luck or some other thing instead. But no, I was cocky and thought I knew better, so I really love those stories.
Yes, yeah, they are like my favorite twist on that story is when there's two humans involved. The first one gets what they want, and the second one tries to recreate the bargain and
Oh
does
yeah,
not get what they want.
yeah.
Thinking of one where a man comes across a circle of fairies and they're singing De Lune, De Mart, De Cadine, De Deirdine, and the man finishes with De Hina, De Saturn, De Dauna. And it's like a song that keeps repeating, repeating, repeating. And I think they give him the gift of music or something like that. And then another person's like, I want that, and just can't get it right. And when I say their lives crumble before your very eyes as you read or listen to this, you would think it's not fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. And you do see it. It's actually a really common trope across all of European folklore, from, fairies and leprechauns in Ireland to two stories of the Baba Yaga in Slavic folklore, of the daughter who was being horribly abused by her stepmother, who sends her to Baba Yaga's hut, but she's a kind and good child who does what she's told and comes back with gifts. And the biological daughter of the stepmother says, I want that, and she goes and she ends up being eaten because she was a wagon,
Yes, yeah. It's one of my favorite twists on kids behave or a monster will take you away.
Yeah.
Is flipping that, which is parents behave or a monster will take your kids away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like when you put it that way, you're like, oh boy. To bring it back to tabletop systems, when it comes to folklore and using mythology within a game, do you prefer, and I know this is, we might be starting a war in the comments because people have different opinions on this, but do you prefer to stay as true as possible to the source material? Or do you treat it more as like a point of inspiration or like the start of Snowball? Because we know games can go every different direction. And so it's where we start before players and chaos and dice put a spin on it. What's your sort of opinion on that?
Well, I mean, for me personally, with Fey Earth, the whole point of this passion project was to be as faithful and authentic as possible. So the Fey creatures that appear in my game, I have tried to portray them as accurately and faithfully as I can based on how they're described in the original stories. Now, however, I've tried to do it in such a way that I'm giving my GM an awful lot of freedom in how they run their own game. So then they can take these core elements that I've given you with my world, with the setting, and with the system that I've developed, and then you can run with that and do whatever you want with it. Because ultimately, when you buy my game, it's no longer my game, it's your game.
Yeah.
And it's for your table of your friends and your players. So there's no wrong way for you to play my game, So that's very much how I feel. Now, it's kind of funny because when you decide to create a game based on magical creatures as they appeared in stories of old, you then run into serious design problems because a single diminutive fairy could easily TPK an entire party of players under level like 5 to 8 easily. If you give them all of the powers the fairies had in the original folklore. Even a cute little pixie was terrifying.
Yeah.
So then you're like, well, crap, like this doesn't work because you need to give stuff to your players that at 4th level they have a chance of actually not dying. So how I actually dealt with that, the mechanics of it being very simply that for every Fey creature in the game, they come with 3 stat blocks. They come with a young, adult, and ancient stat block. So the young version of the creature has some of the abilities that are described in the folklore. The adult has more of the abilities, and the ancient has, all of the abilities. And when I say young, I don't mean a child. It's just a general term to describe, think it in terms of their level of power. So that way, you've still got your Fey, you've still got your creatures, and they are doing stuff that they did in stories, but you know, you can throw a young kobold at your party who's pretty tough and scary, but you know, your 6th level players, they're not gonna instantly die. The really great thing about that though as a GM is then later on when your players are playing again, you throw another one of those creatures at them like, oh, we met one of these guys before, we dealt with them before, but what they don't know is this one's much older than the first one they met, and then they get their ass handed to them. They're like, what the hell happened? How did he do? They couldn't do that the last time. It's like, yeah, well.
Yeah, it makes sense. You come across an apprentice wizard versus a master wizard, they're going to have different...
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But it does then, as I say, it's another way in which the mechanics of the game give you, as the GM, that extra freedom, so that you're playing in a setting that's trying to portray things in an authentic fashion, but you still have a lot of freedom in how you want to run the game.
Which is something I'm very excited about exploring in a game I will run using Fey Earth, which is not, you know, outside of just different versions of these Fey creatures, different aspect of a singular Fey creature. Like, I'm a big fan of young, old, you know, the youth, the adult, the crone sort of situation, so that the players will come across the same person, but at different times and not always chronological.
Yeah,
because hey, it's folklore. That's a lovely way to do it. When you need a wise old Fey, you got a wise old Fey. When you need someone young and they're just kind of spur the party on, that's what they're there for. That kind of triple god, triple goddess aspects to definitely in Irish mythology. It's there. Yeah, I'm sure across the world as well. Speaking of, this is not to undermine. There's no wrong way to play. But this is outside of Fey Earth, because I think it's worth exploring it, especially knowing that what you're getting with Fey Earth is this accurate and genuine and authentic representation. And so what you might have come across in other games kind of twists it a little bit. I know for me, with the big systems, when I see a creature I'm familiar with from my own childhood and I read about it and it's wrong.
Yeah,
I'm like,
I know.
What? Where'd she go?
It's
So any pet peeves when it comes to mythology or folklore in a game?
How long have you got? I mean, the reality is, let's go big or go home. The Dragon game. I mean, the reality is, Gary Gygax got his hands on a book or encyclopedia of European folklore and mythology in the 70s, and basically culturally appropriated an entire continent worth of folklore. He just took the names of all these creatures because they sounded cool and threw them into a game where he didn't even bother trying to depict them as they appear in their original stories. I go for the classic example that I always give of a kobold. So when people think of kobold, they think of the 5e D&D kobold, cute little dragon-like people, okay? Kobolds come from German folklore, okay? They were a type of what I call domestic Fey, meaning that they were a Fey creature that lived in the home or maybe in a business place like a brewery or a mill. They would help out with chores around the house, provided you gave them food and or beer, and were generally respectful and nice to them, okay? They're always invisible. Okay, you never see them. They are always invisible. They are incredibly magically powerful, physically incredibly strong. You see this actually in a lot of stories of domestic Fey. Other examples being the brownies of Scotland, hobgoblins in like Yorkshire, Northern England, and other places like that. Like the brownies from Scottish folklore. They would describe them as saying that they could, in a single night, thrash the same amount of grain that would take 10 men a full day, you know? So the kobolds, as I say, like, magically very powerful, always invisible. And there's a story that I remember reading, I think it was from Dusseldorf, but I'm not 100% sure, of a kobold that lived in the grand palace or estate house of a noble, okay? And a young serving boy tricked the kobold into revealing itself, breaking its invisibility.
Right.
The kobold, upon realizing this, became so enraged he ripped the lad's arm off and beat him to death with it.
Wow.
That's what kobolds wear. But when we think of kobold, we think cute little NPC.
Can I make a little creature? Exactly. Yes. Exploding little bag of wasp throwers.
Exactly. So that's just one example. But that goes to that one story I love, because it really goes to show the massive level of disparity between how these creatures were depicted and what they were like in the original stories, and what people think of them based on how they're depicted in popular media.
Yeah, and what I don't understand is if you just like the sound of something or the aesthetic of something, change it. Like, there's no reason to call the creatures in D&D kobold.
Yeah,
call them anything else. Like, you got 26 letters in the alphabet. Mix them up and throw something in.
Exactly. Yeah.
The just to close us out, and I think it's a good piece to leave any GMs or players watching with. Is there any advice you might give when bringing real world mythology? So speaking of, like, to not pull a Gygax on it, don't be that Gygax and do this instead. When you're bringing that into your fantasy games, is there anything you've learned over your years kind of building Fey Earth or even just running any game, tips and tricks that you'd live by and just know it's a good place to start?
I suppose the thing the thing I would think about is, like, if you pick a creature from a particular culture or folklore, I mean, obviously we should do this respectfully at all times, okay? There's a reason why Fey Earth is set in Europe, because I'm a white European, okay? I wasn't going to make something based on African bleeding folklore or Asian. I was like, no, I'm sticking to A, what I know really well, and B, what is appropriate for me to talk about, okay? So the first thing I say is, like, think, well, why are you bringing this into your game? And make sure A, you're doing it respectfully, and then B, when you then get into the situation of trying to figure out, okay, in the stories they have all these abilities, mechanically, how do I fit that into my game in a way that works within the system that I'm playing in and doesn't break the system that I'm playing in? That I find the way to balance that to make sure you do a good job of it is, as you are figuring out how you're going to mechanically represent abilities, go back to the question of, why am I bringing them into the game? Do these abilities that I give them using the mechanics of my system allow me to represent what I was hoping to represent and tell the story I was hoping to tell with this creature?
I think that's brilliant. And if you're thinking, God, this interview has been so gripping, I haven't had a chance to tab out and support and back Fey Earth and Kickstarter, now's your chance, because we're about to go back to the studio. So do a little command or squiggly thing if you're using a Mac. Command T over to Kickstarter. You'll find this. Just type in Fey Earth, but you'll also have Brambleheart Games. So that's where you know you're in the right place. And we'll have links everywhere around here. So you can just click to write in chat, or if you're watching on VOD after the fact, you'll find it in the show description. Neil, thank you so much for joining us on a roll. Back to you guys in the studio.
Thanks. Bye.
Fey Earth is a tabletop role-playing game set in an alternate 19th century Earth, where all the creatures from folklore and fairy tale are real, have always been real, and live openly alongside humanity. It is a game based heavily on folklore, in which the Fey and magical beings depicted are as they were described in the original stories from whence they came. This means, when you play Fey Earth, you will find yourself coming across many creatures whose names are very familiar, but whose appearance, personalities, and powers are very different from what you might be used to. It is a world, however, in which the Fey have developed alongside humanity, and while in many ways they are similar in how they appeared in fairy tales, in other ways they are also advanced in a similar fashion to humans. We hope to have sparked your interest, and we look forward to welcoming you to this world of folklore, fairy tale, and magic. Welcome to Fey Earth.